I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President Trump praised his administration's efforts to roll back federal regulations at the White House today. He also spoke about the tax bill currently working through Congress, saying he expects Senator Marco Rubio, a reported holdout, to come around.
Oh, I think he'll be there. He's really been a great guy and very supportive. I think that Senator Rubio will be there for sure. And we're doing very well on the tax front. We have tremendous support. We have tremendous spirit.
Senator John Cornyn predicts the Senate will pass the GOP tax legislation on Tuesday. The majority whip also says disaster-related aid will be included in a short-term government measure. Congressional leaders are scrambling to finalize compromise legislation for floor votes next week. Vice President Mike Pence plans to delay his weekend departure for the Middle East. Officials say Pence now plans to leave for Egypt on Tuesday so he can preside over the Senate during that tax vote. 5 years ago today, a gunman shot and killed 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Residents say they're observing the day mostly in private reflection. Flags statewide flying at half-staff today. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, and Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the FCC officially hits reset on the internet. What the contentious vote to repeal net neutrality protections means for the internet of the future. Plus, Disney's mega deal for a massive chunk of Fox, what the world's biggest entertainment company gets for its $52 billion, and what the deal means for the Murdoch empire. And Oracle revenue rises. We'll break down today's second quarter numbers and Oracle's ongoing competition with cloud leader Amazon. But first, to our lead. Net neutrality no more. The FCC voted to repeal the Obama-era internet protections designed to keep broadband providers from favoring content. The Republican-led commission voted 3-2 to remove the protections known as net neutrality. The vote comes amid intense protests, both online and in person, by defenders of the rules, who say that this will create an internet of haves and have-nots when it comes to accessing their content. But FCC Chair Ajit Pai heralded the return to what he called a free speech market approach, saying, "It's time for us to restore internet freedom. We are restoring the light touch framework that has governed the internet for most of its existence." Joining me now, one of the people who earlier voted to repeal net neutrality, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, who was nominated to the commission by President Trump. Commissioner Carr, thank you so much for joining us. You say today is a great day. Many people say today is an awful day. What don't they understand?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question and for having me on. It really is a great day for consumers, for innovation, and for freedom. There's a lot of apocryphal rhetoric out there. Here's the reality. We're voting to go back to the 2015 regulatory framework, the Title I framework, that the Commission had in place, again, in 2015 and for the 20 years before that. This is not moving towards some Mad Max version of the internet where ISPs are going to have complete free reign to dictate your online experience. The 2015 framework had strong legal protections for consumers. Consumers are going to continue to benefit from that without the harms we're seeing from Title II.
That said, a number of organizations say they intend to sue the FCC. An activist group called Free Press saying they'll sue on the basis of broken process, deeply flawed legal reasoning, willful rejection of evidence, and absolute disregard for public input. The Attorney Generals of Washington and New York also saying they intend to sue. Attorney General Eric Schneiderman saying this is not just an attack on the future of our internet, it is an attack on all New Yorkers and on the integrity of every American's voice in government. And we will fight back. What's your reaction to those kinds of comments?
Yeah, anytime the FCC takes an action in the space of internet regulation, companies, big and small, either way, sue over the decisions we make. But here's the reality. The Supreme Court in 2005 took up the FCC's authority to classify broadband internet access service as a Title I information service, and it found that the FCC did have the authority. And that's the only classification the Supreme Court has ever blessed. So the FCC's decision here, both as a procedural matter and as a substantive legal matter, is on extremely sound legal footing. So I'm confident in where we go from here.
We also spoke with former FCC Chair Tom Wheeler, who oversaw net neutrality protections. Take a listen to what he told us.
For the first time since 1934, with this decision, the FCC is washing its hands, walking away from that congressionally mandated responsibility. And they're only doing it for the, most important network that will define the rest of the 21st century. It's an inconceivable kind of action.
What do you make of this accusation that the FCC is absolving itself of responsibility rather than taking responsibility?
That's simply not the case. Again, we're going back to the same regulatory framework that was in place in 2015. I think your listeners and viewers can remember the Internet of 2015. It was not a free-for-all. There were protections. Those protections are going to be back in place. Again, the Federal Trade Commission is going to be fully empowered for the first time in 2 years to police ISPs' conduct with respect to consumers. The FCC's 2015 decision stripped the Federal Trade Commission of 100% of its authority to protect consumers against ISPs. Another key piece of that is online privacy protections, which consumers care deeply about. The FTC is the nation's premier consumer protection agency. Again, they've been prohibited during the last 2 years from taking action because of the FCC's Title II decision. So consumers are gaining protections as a result of this decision. Again, this is not going to be a situation where there are no rules in place.
Now, Comcast has said they won't invoke paid prioritization, but let's say they do. What would happen in that case?
Well, I think part of what happens here is there's a misperception about what Title II did. Right now, Title II is not stopping providers from blocking websites, creating fast and slow lanes, the paid prioritization you talked about. There are reasons why that stuff is not taking place today. It's market forces that are regulating that conduct. And after our decision, those forces stay in place. And I know there's a lot of people that don't believe in market forces, and that's fine. There's actual positive law we're putting in place, too. There's federal antitrust law, which prevents ISPs from entering agreements that unfairly, anti-competitively block, throttle, or would create anti-competitive paid prioritization. So there's going to be rules and legal standards out there that are going to be able to police any of this conduct that people are talking about.
What about the fake comments in the public comment section? Doesn't that give you any pause that 1 million comments were written potentially by a robot, to counter the vast majority of comments that were against this repeal?
No, it doesn't give me pause. Here's why. We have run an open and transparent process. The Administrative Procedure Act is very clear about how, as an agency like us, we run our rulemakings and run our record. We have an open record. Anybody that wants to file a comment can file a comment. We don't require identification on the front end because that would discourage the robust participation in our docket. We got over 24 million filings in our proceeding. I think that shows the passion that people have in this issue, and our decision is based on the substantial record evidence that we developed.
Right, but the vast majority of those comments were against this repeal.
There was a wide range of views that were expressed, and again, the question that we have to confront is a threshold legal matter for the FCC. Did Congress, when they set up Title I of the Communications Act and Title II of the Communications Act, did they intend the Internet to be in one or the other? And when you look at that legal determination that we have to make as commissioners at the agency, it's clear to me that this is a Title I information service.
So when will we see lawmakers actually enact this into law?
So our decision today goes into effect as soon as the OMB, another government agency, reviews the transparency rule that we adopted, and then it will take effect shortly after that. And so that's the timeline that we're looking at.
And how do you see the Internet, let's say the Internet 5 years from now, being different? Already it seems like so much power is consolidated in the hands of a few very powerful companies. Many of those companies were against this repeal. But how does the Internet look different to you, let's say, in 5 years?
It's a good question. Again, that's why this is such a great decision. Title II is a monopoly-style regulation, a heavy-handed regime. A lot of the debate has been about AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, or the big ISPs. I think they've been negatively impacted. I think that's what our record shows. But they also have an army of regulatory lawyers that can wade through the Title II requirements. When I talk to consumers, what they want is more competition, and that's where Title II heads us in the wrong direction. There's thousands of smaller ISPs out there that are either trying to provide service to consumers for the first time or provide competition to some of those larger providers. Those are the ones that have been hurt worst by this decision. So I look forward, when we repeal this Title II rule, those providers are going to have an easier time competing, getting money, and consumers are going to benefit as a result of that increased competition from repealing Title II.
All right, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have much more on today's net neutrality decision later in the show. We'll be speaking to Reddit CEO Steve Huffman, who says the battle's not over. Well, Oracle and Adobe reporting earnings after the close today. Oracle sales topped estimates with adjusted revenue rising 6.5% to $9.62 billion. Adobe also beat estimates in the fourth quarter with revenue coming in at $2 billion. We'll have more on the results later this hour. Coming up, the mouse eats the fox. Disney takes a big chunk of Rupert Murdoch's empire. We'll hear from CEO Bob Iger on how the mega media deal came about and tell you everything you need to know next. This is Bloomberg. A mega media deal has been announced after weeks of speculation. Disney is snapping up a large chunk of 21st Century Fox assets in a deal valued at more than $54 billion, the biggest acquisition at Disney to date. Bloomberg TV's Jonathan Farrow caught up with Disney CEO Bob Iger in LA, and he explained how the deal came about.
A year ago, I didn't see this one coming either, nor did I see it coming 6 months ago. Rupert and I have known each other for a long time. We have a lot of respect for one another and occasionally get together to muse about the business. And in a get-together this summer, where we were talking about all the disruptive forces that we were seeing and the relative position of our companies, I left thinking that there might be an opportunity for us to do something with him. And I thought about it for a few weeks, called him thereafter, and suggested maybe we should get together and talk about it, and we did. Spent some time actually analyzing whether there was something to be done and what the value proposition might be for shareholders of both companies, and ultimately rolled our sleeves up, got into a negotiation, and here we are today. And I think what we're doing is creating not only a great company, but a great global opportunity for consumers to not only consume great content made by both entities, but to consume it under circumstances that are innovative and compelling and much more user-friendly, and that's what the consumer of today demands.
Bob, we learned a little bit more about your future now, stepping down in 2021 versus 2019 previously. What's the future for James Murdoch?
James and I have talked a lot about a potential role for him. He will be integral to helping us plan the integration process, and he and I will continue to talk about whether there's a role for him at this company. We've had a good relationship, and he's been extremely helpful in this process, and I look forward to talking to him more about it.
Bob, a lot of people are thinking about the succession plan at the Walt Disney Company now and thinking that maybe James Murdoch could be part of that. Is that something you could see happening?
Well, I'm now extended through 2021, and the board of the company will have ample time to consider its options in terms of my succession and to re-engage in a planning process for that. And it's premature to really speculate. Ultimately, it will be a board decision.
Disney CEO Bob Iger there with Bloomberg's Jonathan Farrow. We'll bring you more of that conversation later this hour. But first, here to discuss everything we need to know about the deal, we are joined by Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri in LA. So first, Chris, walk us through, Iger said he didn't see this deal happening, though there was speculation about it for some time. Walk us through the nuts and bolts of the deal and what it means.
Well, basically, the bulk of what we know is of Fox, most of its entertainment assets are going to Disney. The Fox Studio, the FX cable channel, the National Geographic channel, a lot of international assets, the company's stake in Sky, a big satellite TV provider in Europe, Star of India is a TV provider there. So it's a massive chunk of Fox now merging with Disney.
So what do you think of this idea that James Murdoch could be Iger's successor, even if it's years from now?
There was a lot about this, going into the announcement that he would be named in some sort of senior role at Disney, and kind of a surprise today was that nothing happened. Now, neither side ruled it out, and Bob Iger, he said he expects him to have an advisory role in integrating the two companies, but nothing clear yet. So, and Bob's saying now he's going to stick around for 4 more years. So, it's hard to say at this point that James Murdoch has any real clear path to the CEO of Disney.
This is Disney's biggest acquisition ever. How does this fit into the context of their prior M&A?
Well, previously it was really about content. If they made smaller technology deals, but it was basically about bringing all these wonderful characters, whether it was Pixar or Marvel or Lucasfilm, Star Wars, into the film division. And here it's a much broader play, and it's really a doubling down on the film and TV business at this very pivotal moment where things are changing so rapidly. So we're going to see a lot of exciting things out of Disney from a technology standpoint. Bob Iger sketched out a sort of a multi-pronged strategy. He's going to have an online version of ESPN launching next year. He's going to have a Disney-branded channel in 2019 that's going to have all this Marvel and Star Wars content. And Hulu, which they're not going to have control of, 60% stake, is going to be kind of the adult version of what they're trying to do, and that's where Fox really comes into play with some of its programming. And so, they're trying to create an online choice for everybody.
What do you think how do you think this will impact the bigger media and entertainment industry?
I think if you're Netflix, you do have to be nervous. Both sides would try to play that down. But Netflix is losing the Disney movies in 2019. And Bob Iger in interviews today sort of, suggested that a lot of the Fox stuff, Fox has a movie deal with HBO, but there's TV shows that go to Netflix. And so we're now seeing sort of everyone sort of taking their programming in-house, and particularly in Disney's case, through their own distribution pipeline. And so we're going to have to see a similar reaction. CBS has already sort of had that strategy with its All Access and Star Trek and that. And so, we're going to see a lot of other deals coming in the wake of this, for sure.
All right, Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri for us there in Hollywood. We are going to be digging into this deal and the streaming battles a bit later this hour. One of the most popular cryptocurrencies, meantime, cryptocurrency exchanges, has added a big name in tech to its board. David Marcus, head of Facebook Messenger, is joining the board of Coinbase. The company's CEO, Brian Armstrong, said David's knowledge of both the payments and mobile space will help guide us in achieving our mission of creating a truly open financial system that will bring opportunity to people all across the globe. Coinbase has seen an explosion in user growth in the last year as the value of Bitcoin soars. Coming up, more on Oracle and Adobe's fourth quarter earnings. We'll bring you the biggest highlights and misses next. This is Bloomberg. Tech investor Shervin Pishavar has resigned from the venture capital firm he co-founded, Sherpa Capital, effective immediately. Last month, Bloomberg first reported Pishavar was accused of sexual assault and harassment by multiple women in the tech industry. In a statement, the company said, "We are deeply committed to our culture of integrity, inclusion, and respect, and will continue to put these values into action through all of Sherpa Capital's activities, including the founders and companies we support." Pishavar also released his own statement saying, "I plan to focus now on the appropriate ongoing legal actions against those who are unjustly orchestrating the smear campaign against me." He has denied all allegations. Now to our coverage of tech firms reporting earnings. Both Oracle and Adobe out after the bell. Oracle reported adjusted revenue for the second quarter that met analyst estimates at $9.6 billion. Adobe reporting as well, beating estimates for revenue in the fourth quarter at $2 billion. To talk about it all in more detail, I want to bring in our Bloomberg editor at large, Corey Johnson. So Corey, let's start with Oracle, where it is all about the cloud, apparently.
Absolutely. That's the story. Look, for all of technology, it's all about the cloud. And as Oracle tries to make its move from the dominant seller of enterprise software in the database to a cloud seller, everyone's focused on their cloud business, as they should be. And the results from Oracle in the cloud are fantastic. On a year-over-year basis, the cloud grew at 44% for all of their cloud businesses. And it was a very impressive quarter. And I think yet the stock is down, and I'll get to that. But the stock being down in the after-hours trading, I think is a reflection of just how high the expectations were coming into this quarter for Oracle, and that every quarter they're talking cloud, cloud, cloud. Investors expect to see lots of cloud and lots of guiding up. And I think that when they just do what they said they were going to do, which is pretty impressive, that's not enough for the market that wants to see them beat and raise.
Let's talk about how far Oracle has come. For so long, it was that Oracle hadn't caught up to the cloud. Now that they are there, what remains in terms of continuing to fight that battle and fend off the competition, some of whom got there first?
Yeah, I think Salesforce loves to say that they're first and that they're doing bigger job in Salesforce-like or software, CRM software, and indeed they've done quite well at that. And Oracle has largely attacked every other piece of the cloud. And I think the most interesting thing about what Oracle's doing as a cloud is they're not just doing database in the cloud. They're doing all kinds of applications, whether it's HR applications to compete with Workday, whether it's some CRM to compete with Salesforce, whether it's every ERP stuff, which is where they really are the leader in ERP in the cloud. And you look at the biggest areas of software, and they are there in size. The cumulative result, of course, is that Oracle's doing very well in lots of areas. But then add to that they're really going right after Amazon and offering infrastructure as a service, whether it's compute or even storage. They're building data centers. They're bringing lots of their customers into their own cloud. It's starting to make sense of the Sun acquisition. Sun was a pretty rough acquisition for Oracle, but they're starting to put all those Sun devices at work in their own data centers, offering sort of top-of-the-line computational power in their data cloud. And it's interesting to look at them not just attack what Salesforce is doing, but attack Salesforce and attack Microsoft and attack Workday and attack what Amazon.com is doing in Amazon Web Services, and really go after all of the major companies in the cloud in everything that they are doing when it comes to the enterprise.
Oracle CEO Mark Hurd on the call right now saying the pipeline is the biggest they've ever had. Let's move on to Adobe there, though. What are the highlights there?
Strong growth from Adobe, but very consistent growth. And I think that once again, they didn't do enough of a beat and a raise. And we have all this talk about tax reform. We look at companies like Disney doing big mergers today, and we say, what are these companies doing with a better environment than they might have seen a year ago? They're kind of staying where they were a year ago. So 25% growth for the year for Adobe, but also 25% of the growth in the quarter. The lack of acceleration might be disappointing some very bullish investors who expect enterprises to be spending a lot more, particularly if there is a big tax cut here where they'll be able to put a lot more money to use. If companies spend a lot of money because of a tax cut, if they don't just go for dividends and share buybacks, they'll be spending money in software, and maybe software first. You might have expected Oracle and Adobe to guide up as a result of that, but that didn't happen today.
All right, Corey Johnson, our Bloomberg editor-at-large there for us in New York. Thanks so much, Corey, for breaking it all down. Coming up, the vote to overturn net neutrality may be over, but the battle is far from over, according to our next guest. We talked to Reddit's CEO about the future of internet protections. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. UN Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, today presented the U.S. with what she says is undeniable evidence that Iran is violating international law by providing missiles for rebels in Yemen.
The nuclear deal has done nothing to moderate the regime's conduct in other areas. Aid from Iran's Revolutionary Guard to dangerous militias and terror groups is increasing. Its ballistic missiles and advanced weapons are turning up in war zones across the region. It's hard to find a conflict or a terrorist group in the Middle East that does not have Iran's fingerprints all over it.
Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn says Arizona Senator John McCain should be available on the Senate floor for crucial votes next week to overhaul the U.S. tax system. McCain is receiving treatment at Walter Reed Medical Center for side effects of his ongoing cancer therapy. The White House says President Trump and House Speaker Paul Ryan spoke by phone about reports Ryan plans to leave Congress.
The president did speak to the speaker not too long ago and made sure that the speaker knew very clearly and in no uncertain terms that if that news was true, he was very unhappy with it. The speaker assured the president that those were not accurate reports and that they look forward to working together for a long time to come.
The Kremlin says Presidents Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump spoke by phone today to discuss North Korea. Moscow says Washington requested the conversation At his annual news conference today, Putin also said accusations that President Trump colluded with Russia have hurt the U.S. political system. Leaders from 28 EU countries arrived in Brussels today for a summit on security and advancing Brexit talks. Lawmakers will debate whether sufficient progress has been made to move on to the second phase of future relations and trade. The summit comes one day after UK MPs voted to give Parliament a final say on Brexit, which could reduce May's leverage in negotiating an exit deal. And British royals and Prime Minister Theresa May joined survivors and the families of those who died in London's Grenfell Tower fire for a memorial service today. 71 people were killed in that blaze. Prince Charles, his wife Camilla, Prince Harry, Prince William, and his wife Kate joined some 1,500 people at the multi-faith service at St. Paul's Cathedral. It was held exactly 6 months after that June 14th fire that engulfed a residential tower block in West London. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, and Bloomberg Technology is next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Now back to our top story. The FCC voting to overturn the Obama-era internet protections known as net neutrality. One of the top sites in defense of net neutrality has been the online community Reddit. Its users have been very vocal in their anger over the FCC's vote. CEO Steve Huffman wrote a post saying, "Today's vote is the beginning, not the end. While the fight to preserve net neutrality is going to be longer than we had hoped, this is far from over. Reddit will continue to be involved in this issue in the way that we know best, seeking out every opportunity to amplify your voices and share them with those who have the power to make a difference." Joining me now, the author of that post, Reddit CEO and co-founder Steve Huffman. So Steve, Commissioner Brendan Carr was on the show earlier talking about why he thinks today is a great day. You think today is a not so great day. Why?
Well, so today was a big setback for people who believe in a free and open and fair internet. The real winners today are ISPs, particularly large ISPs, who are also large media companies who would like nothing better than to pick winners and losers online and to stifle competition.
Let's take a listen to what Commissioner Carr had to say on that very point. Take a listen.
Those are the ones that have been hurt worst by this decision. So I look forward, when we repeal this Title II rule, those providers are going to have an easier time competing, getting money, and consumers are going to benefit as a result of that increased competition from repealing Title II.
He's saying smaller ISPs will benefit. Do you think he's wrong?
I do think he's wrong. I can't remember the last time deregulating monopolies increased competition. I think that's nonsensical, to be honest.
So how do you see this playing out? I mean, what are the consequences?
Well, if FCC or if net neutrality is absolutely gone, and to be fair, we have a long ways to go before we get to that point, we'll be back where we were 10 years ago. And there's plenty of examples of ISPs abusing their power back then. For example, AT&T blocking Skype, right? AT&T charging extra to use FaceTime. Comcast blocking BitTorrent. If they had the opportunity to kill Netflix when it was in the womb, I'm sure they would have done so.
Do you think those are the kinds of things that are going to happen now? If
Absolutely.
Happens, right?
I think they're only more savvy. There's only more competition online, and the stakes are as high as ever because the internet is largely replacing a lot of older forms of media.
So you think the Netflix of the future, for example, won't ever have a chance?
We'll have a very difficult time, yes.
So what are Reddit users saying?
They are saying, and this is a rare opportunity for Reddit users to actually agree on something pretty much across the board. Reddit users are very upset. They're very upset the same way that most Americans are upset. I think what you see on Reddit, as usual, is a reflection of what's going on in the real world. And 83% of Americans polled are in favor of the net neutrality regulations. And you see this play out on Reddit as well.
So you're here today speaking on behalf of the company. What can Reddit as a company actually do?
Well, what we can do is organize the voice of our users and point them in the right direction. And so what we believe is the most effective course of action right now is to reach out to your representatives, to your senators, and voice your opinion, because they have a lot of influence on this. And as we said before, the fight isn't over, and it's very important that your representatives know what your feelings are, and so that their actions can reflect the will of their constituents.
You guys have been doing much more, you say, to take on issues like online harassment and trolling on the platform. What kind of progress have you made?
We've made some pretty good progress. So at the beginning of the year, our responses were 100% reactive, which means a user reports bad behavior, and then we deal with it. And we were getting more effective at that. But now we're very proud to say that we're over 60% proactive, which means we're catching bad behavior before it even affects users. And that's when it makes a real impact in your experience on the site.
Now, you had your own situation where your own run-in with the Trump trolls, if you will, where you edited some of the user comments, you've apologized, you say you regret it, but it's that kind of abuse of power that people who are concerned about power being consolidated into the hands of a few are worried about.
In that particular case, we had the Trump supporters doing what they do best, which is accusing somebody they don't like of being a pedophile. So what I did was replace instances of my username with their usernames for about 20 minutes, really as a joke. So I don't think conflating that sort of prank with limiting free speech online and limiting competition is really a fair comparison.
So what kind of abuse of power do you think could be possible in a world where net neutrality does not exist?
I think the real big challenge here is that the largest ISPs in the country are also some of the largest media companies. And so these media companies then have disproportionate control over what you can do online. And most consumers in the United States only can choose from one or two ISPs, so there's no real competition there. And so if your competition is between not having internet, and then that company can pick and choose winners, I think that's a real problem.
What kind of activity have you seen among the Trump trolls, or traditionally Trump trolls, over the course of the first year of the administration?
Well, I think calling them trolls might be a little unfair. I mean, I'll try to take the middle ground here. Look, they support Trump. That's what they do. It's not an opinion that a lot of Americans share at this point. I think when you look at his latest approval ratings, but you do see a lot of people blindly supporting Trump, which I think is disappointing, but not entirely surprising.
And yet, are those same people against the repeal of net neutrality?
Well, it's really hard to say. I think they're torn on this one, right? This is one of those issues that I think causes a little cognitive dissonance, where people want to blindly support Trump, but this one's pretty obvious. So there's a lot of infighting over this.
I'm curious about the Bitcoin conversation. You've got a lot of cryptocurrency enthusiasts, early cryptocurrency enthusiasts on Reddit. What are the conversations happening there that maybe haven't yet hit the mainstream?
Well, so the Bitcoin community on Reddit is as old as Bitcoin itself. We've really been kind of the center of the conversation here for a long time. So needless to say, the last couple of weeks people have been very excited. I would say probably irrationally excited. But if you want to know what's going on in Bitcoin, the Reddit communities are probably the best place to start.
All right, Steve Huffman, CEO and co-founder of Reddit. Great to have you back here.
Thank you.
On the show. We'll be watching to see how you crusade against the repeal that happened today. Thank you. Well, Amazon is extending an olive branch to Google. The e-commerce giant announced it will once again sell Google's Chromecast streaming device. Amazon stopped selling the device 2 years ago, which Google cited as a reason why it blocked YouTube on Amazon devices. Amazon is also resuming sales of Apple TV devices, also after a 2-year hiatus. Coming up, the $52 billion Disney-Fox deal could help lead the House of Mouse to become the next streaming giant. Could the company become a major threat to Netflix? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. More now on the massive deal between Disney and 21st Century Fox. Ever since Disney ended its licensing agreement with Netflix earlier this year, you could say the company has gotten serious about standalone streaming. And with this deal, Disney gets a huge leg up to lure users to its service. Here's what CEO Bob Iger had to say earlier on Bloomberg TV.
We have long expressed a desire to be in the direct-to-consumer business. We think that That is, in many respects, a way of the world these days. Not only does it provide consumers with better opportunities in terms of personalization and customization, but it provides the company with more opportunities in terms of reaching more consumers in more consumer-friendly ways. And we think that's a compelling argument in terms of creating value. We will use the Fox assets in terms of intellectual property and intellectual property creation abilities to grow Hulu probably at a more accelerated pace. We'll also use the Fox assets to help complement our other services as well, Disney-branded direct-to-consumer service, as well as on the sports front.
Well, Bob, just to put you on the spot, though, what you did with Disney and Netflix, ending the licensing agreement, is that something you think that makes financial sense to consider ending any license agreement that 21st Century Fox on the content side had with Netflix?
Netflix has been a great partner to us, and we considered essentially ending that relationship very seriously because of the revenue that it generated for our company. But we're in the business of creating long-term value. We're in this for the long term. And as we looked ahead and we saw basically the world that I just described, a world where direct-to-consumer proposition was far more compelling both for the consumer and for the distributor, we believed it was time, and we'll obviously take that approach, time to exit the Netflix relationship, and we'll take that approach with the assets that we're buying as well.
Disney CEO Bob Iger there, and our Bloomberg News reporter Lucas Shaw joins us now from LA to talk about how Disney can become a streaming powerhouse thanks to this acquisition. Lucas, I do want to start with Hulu. Disney now has a majority stake in Hulu, whereas the minority owners are Disney's competition. What does that mean for Hulu?
For the short term, it doesn't mean much just because Disney's not going to be able to change anything until the deal gets approved. But in the long term, it means that for the first time really in Hulu's existence, it's got one company in control with the ability to make decisions. You know, Hulu was founded by NBC and Fox, then Disney comes in, and for most of its existence, it's kind of suffered with fights between different board members, different disagreements as to strategy. It's been on the block a couple times. It's had a bunch of CEOs. And if Disney can really settle on one strategy that it wants to execute and a leader that it believes in, whether it's current CEO Randy Freer or somebody else, that will be a positive for Hulu moving forward.
What does this deal give Disney that would position it well competitively versus Netflix?
Well, Fox's TV studio has some of the best assets, you know, some of the best TV shows and movies in the world, whether it's The Simpsons or The X-Files, the Avatar movie franchise. All of that now goes to Disney, which itself owns some of the most valuable TV shows and movies. You'd be hard-pressed to find a company that has a better trove of intellectual property, and that's really what you need, you know, to make these streaming services work. You kind of talked about Disney taking some of those movies off of Netflix. That has forced Netflix to try to build its own studio in-house, which it's in the process of doing. It's doing so, but it takes a lot of time. Disney now has the benefit of owning two different studios and the wealth of IP that they have.
Right, and Netflix is spending billions of dollars to make this happen. I mean, this deal does put Disney into debt, but who's in a better financial position?
I mean, right now, probably Disney, just because of how much cash all the businesses that they have throw off. You know, for Netflix, the bet is on long-term growth. You know, they're barely profitable worldwide, whereas Disney, for some of its recent struggles, you know, makes far more in revenue and profits every quarter.
And curious, Lucas, for your thoughts on these Disney succession issues. I mean, now obviously it's 4 more years out, but there's talk of James Murdoch. You know, how do you and the Iger succession questions probably won't calm down as they haven't for the last several years. You know, what shape do you think those conversations will take over the next 4 years?
You know, every time this question comes up, you find people hard-pressed to believe that Bob Iger wants to leave and give up control and give up one of the best jobs in corporate America, really in the world, unless he has a clear next act. And so we've seen several times now he has extended his tenure. With this one through 2021, there will continue to be talk about it. But my guess is it'll be muted a little bit because he is here for the next 3 or 4 years, unless they were to give some inclination that James Murdoch or someone else from the Fox portfolio or someone else within Disney were next in line. If they change, if at some point in this process they name a COO or make it clear that there is a successor, That obviously changed the terms of the conversation, but until they do that, I think Iger probably bought a couple years before there's the same type of speculation that we've endured of late.
All right, Bloomberg's Lucas Shaw there for us in LA. Lucas, thanks so much for that update. Coming up, Target's attempt to challenge Amazon in e-commerce orders. We'll discuss the $550 million Shipt acquisition next. And Bloomberg Real Yield with Jonathan Farrow will be on location at JP Morgan this Friday, talking about everything fixed income, which will, of course, include this week's central bank's decisions. It all kicks off 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Bloomberg. A stock we are watching, shares of Twitter rose as much as 7% in Thursday's session, its highest level in more than a year. Industry watchers cite increasing odds of a possible Twitter tie-up following Disney's deal to buy a chunk of 21st Century Fox. Also helping fuel M&A speculation, this tweet from Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein that showed him posing with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey at the company's headquarters with a caption, "And they say, I don't know Jack." Now to a story we are following here in the U.S. Target is getting ready to bring same-day delivery to most of its stores next year. The retail giant is purchasing grocery delivery startup Shipt in a $550 million all-cash deal. The deal will allow Target to offer same-day delivery at about half of its 1,800 stores by next summer. Joining us now from New York, Ian Sigalo, co-founder and partner at Greycroft and also one of Shipt's investors and board members. So, Ian, what exactly does Shipt bring to Target?
So Shipt has two assets that Target's interested in. The first asset is they have an e-commerce business. The front end is like Demandware, so they power e-commerce shopping carts, checkout. They do this for many merchants across the United States. And the second asset is they have a delivery fleet, which numbers about 21,000 active drivers. And to put that in comparison, that's roughly about 1/8 the number of active drivers that Uber has in the United States.
Is it all about fending off competition from Amazon?
Well, on one hand, yes, and on one hand, no. You know, Amazon's fresh business is small. Post-acquisition of Whole Foods, it obviously got a lot bigger, although Whole Foods is still a relatively small grocer. So I think Target's actually very forward-leaning here with this acquisition, and they're thinking about how to bring their grocery business online as well as power other grocers' online business.
There's still a question of how much grocery shopping will actually move online. In fact, it's one of the businesses that has moved online fairly slowly, where you have some consumers saying they just prefer to go to the store. I mean, do you think this is ultimately a majority online business, or that it'll be fairly split?
Well, I think it's a majority online business. For a category right now, it's about 1% to 2% online, out of, call it, $800 billion to $1 trillion of consumer spend. Our internal best guess is that in the next 5 years, it will be somewhere between 5% and 10% online. So that's a very large movement. $80 billion of purchase behavior moving from in-store to online. And once that starts, it ends up growing very fast because grocers are relatively low-margin businesses, and if you take away 10% of their customer base, they start to fold.
So, looking at some of your other investments, you've invested in other food tech, you've invested in payments. What are the trends you're focused on going into 2018?
So right now, I'd say healthcare is a major trend for us. We're looking at tools and software that provide efficiency and care to individuals in the home. We're spending a lot of time looking at machine learning companies applied to fintech, healthcare, consumer markets. I think the third trend is direct-to-consumer products. So every day there's a new consumer product company that pops up that's attacking a legacy business from a P&G or a Unilever, but it's built entirely online.
You've invested in Venmo and Braintree. I'm curious if cryptocurrency is on your list or decidedly not on your list?
Yeah. Well, we've invested in a handful of companies that use blockchain. We invested in one company called BitPesa, which is a cryptocurrency-based business, although it's not on the consumer side. They help businesses move money out of Africa largely because there are a lot of currency controls in those countries. So P&G is actually a customer of BitPesa. But largely, I'm not speculating in cryptocurrency itself.
And I'm curious, we've been reporting on sexual harassment and assault allegations against the venture capitalist Shervin Pishavar, who just announced today that he's resigning from Sherpa Capital. What is your reaction to these kinds of allegations and, plan to address the climate for women in entrepreneurship and women in VC going forward?
I don't know Shervin, so I can't comment on Sherpa. But from a Graycroft perspective, we have a female founder, one of the now today 7 partners, one of the 3 founders, my partner Dana Settle, who runs our LA office, as well as Ellie Wheeler in New York. And at the time, there weren't very many females in the venture business 11 years ago. There are quite a few today. And I think we did this internal study. Over 40% of our portfolio companies have a founder that's either a minority or a woman.
All right, Ian Sigalo, Graycroft partner, thank you so much for joining us today on Bloomberg Tech. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.